Carl, for that well-worded prayer. We do have several that are out and missing, and we continue to mention them in our prayers. Certainly good to be here, worship God in spirit and truth. Certainly to see all these smiling faces together on this Lord's Day. We do have visitors once again, always welcome here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being with us. Made mention of Kevin. I chided him back there about his improvement. Carl prayed for Kevin this morning, and he is improving. He was walking and looking good. I said something about those big heavy boots. If he take those things off, he might be able to just run in here. He said Sunday was the only day he wore them, so I don't know. He puts them on practices every week. I don't know. But he is definitely showing signs of improvement. We're thankful for that. Let's be in Samuel this morning. I want to look at 1 Samuel chapter 3. We're going to be in Samuel chapter 2, chapter 3 this morning, most of our time. But I want to begin reading by reading verse 13. He says, "For I have told him that I'm about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them." What's the worst thing that can happen to your kids? Ever think about what's the worst thing that could possibly happen to your kids? You know, I was thinking this week about those kids last year. Remember in Thailand, it went cave exploring, and they got in there, and the water rose up, and they couldn't get out. I mean, that'd just freak you out if you were a parent thinking about that, or maybe you're thinking of some kind of illness or sickness or disease. Your child would have a tumor or be diagnosed with cancer, and you think about what could happen. And of course, somewhere in that would be a criminal act like an abduction. If something like that would happen to your kid, I can't even wrap my head around that if that would happen. Sometime long ago, I read where a woman was asked what it was like to have children, and she said this: it's like having your heart walking around outside your body all the time. And if you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that. Just when I thought I had my heart stuffed back inside my chest, you know, both boys married, Steph here, a fine young Christian lady married to Jacob, and Daisy's doing fine, nice family. You know, I think everything's good to go, and then you got, you know, these little boys and little girls running around here, and then I find my heart right back out of my chest, and that's usually how it happens when you become a grandparent. But in all these things we think about what could happen to our kids, we being the people of God, when we think about us being the people of God, it's not an accident or a disease or an awful crime when we think about our kids, but actually what we think about is that our children would be away from God. And as you look at verse 13, his sons blasphemed God. The star of 1 Samuel 13 is actually, of course, Samuel, but this chapter is about the word of the Lord coming to him. But also this chapter reveals something else. It reveals another person. There's the other side of the coin in this chapter. And it begins talking about a man by the name of Eli. Eli is bad. Eli's a bad man. He's singled out in a way that really is unparalleled to the rest of the Bible. He's singled out as a terrible father. And the Bible goes out of its way to specify directly that he's responsible. Verse 13, the iniquity that he knew, he did not restrain them. You want to talk about the worst thing that could happen to your kids? That's the worst thing that could happen. How could it be any worse than really you're going to find out in a time when God wasn't saying much, he wasn't revealing much, that your kids are running so amok and so in such a sin-filled life that God, in a time when he wasn't speaking, would make a point and find it necessary to speak to this young boy Samuel to say, what? The judgment of the Lord is falling on you. Now listen, I don't want to stand in front of God someday and hear God say, I'll tell you what, your kids, they're just like Eli's kids. And you're just like Eli. And what 1 Samuel chapter 3 does, it diagrams out for us a picture of a family that is in spiritual failure. They failed. They failed spiritually, and really 1 Samuel brings those points out again and again and again. Now, I need to say a word or two here to parents. Some of you this morning experienced pain, what I'm talking about, that your children are away from the Lord. And I want to say very clearly to you that I don't intend to hurt you and cause any additional pain. Because these chapters, I want you to recognize, talk a lot about free will. And sometimes we can raise our children according to the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and you know what? They're going to reject it. They're going to go away from it, and they're going to do what they please. But I don't think it's ever a bad thing, ever, to examine our lives, to examine carefully what we did as parents. And if we did some things that are wrong, you know what we can do? We can repent of those things. We can change those things. And I know that those of you who have this hurt in your heart, that are exactly or really experiencing what we're talking about this morning, I know that you would want me to preach the whole counsel of God, so that those that are here might hear the whole counsel of God and not experience the difficulties that you're going to see in 1 Samuel here. But this chapter is about a family that utterly failed spiritually. I want you to pay close attention. This morning we're going to point out four things I think that we can see of a family that is going to have spiritual failure. I think these passages bring it out. They've made some terrible mistakes, and really I want us to observe and think about the mistakes that they made so it doesn't happen to us. One of the first things I've noticed is I think there's a failure in the leadership of the family. And the spiritual failure, I think, began in Eli's household. When you look at it with the dad, Eli, guess what? Just too busy. Eli's just too busy. And if you step back, let's go back to chapter 1. Look at verse 9. Chapter 1, verse 9. He says, then Hannah rose. Hannah's getting ready she comes to the tabernacle to pray. Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat of the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Now, the best we can tell, Eli was a priest. And that meant that he was in charge of Israel's worship. That meant that he was in charge in regard to the temple. And that meant that he's unbelievably busy. That would have meant that literally hundreds of people would have passed through to offer sacrifices, and Eli would have been in charge of that. There's all kinds of sacrifices when you start talking about the atoning sacrifices for sin, the peace offerings that were made. There would be offerings of thanksgiving. All of those things would happen on a daily basis. That doesn't even include the yearly sacrifices, the annual feast, the Passover, the Feast of the Booths, and of course you had the Day of Atonement. Eli would personally take the blood. He would take the blood into the most holy place, sprinkle it on the Ark of the Covenant for his sins as well as the sins of the people. All these things Eli did. Even more than that, if you read and look in this book, you'll find that Eli, not only was he a priest and did all of those things, he was actually a judge. And I want you to, I know some of you, when you hear the word judge, sometimes that means like Gideon, a military leader, not a judge with a gavel and a judge-looking suit. But when, chapter 4, verse 18, that he judged Israel, in the last phrase of that chapter, in chapter 4, he judged Israel for 40 years. And he is a judge. He's an actual judge, a decider of right and wrong with the people. He's fixing stuff. He's judging stuff. He's taking care of all the cares of the people. And all of that to say this about Eli. Guy's busy. Eli is he's kind of a big deal. Eli is busy. He's a busy man. So can you imagine one of our elders be like Van or John being governor of West Virginia? Let's think about that again. I don't know why that came out. But that's what it'd be like. All right? Think about the responsibilities they have to shepherd the flock, all the things that go with that. And plus they've got some political involvement. That's Eli. That's just how busy he is. And all of that responsibility that Eli had, one of the things that he forgot was what? The responsibility that mattered most in all of that. Look at verse 12 of chapter 2. He says, now the sons of Eli were worthless men. I'm in the New American Standard sometimes. He says, they did not know the Lord. What in the world? How is it possible that one of the most important religious officials of the day, that he didn't have any impact on his children? No impact on his children. And the text goes on, verse 13, let's look at it. The custom of the priest with the people, with any man, was offering a sacrifice. The priest servant would come while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. They did in Shiloh, this they did in Shiloh, to all the Israelites, he says, that come there. This was done, all right, verse 15, before the fat was burned. Now, that was important. The fat was God's part. And so some of the people went, wait a minute, you can't be doing that. And in verse 15, the servant would say, give meat for the priest. But verse 16, the man would say, no. Let them burn the fat first and then take as much as you wish. Can't do that. You're doing it wrong. You're taking God's portion, all right? The wrong kind of worship. But look, you must give it now. And if not, I'll take it by force, verse 16. So the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord. The men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. How did that happen? Those boys grew up in the tabernacle. They knew every nook and cranny of the tabernacle, all the buildings of the whole. They knew the whole thing. They knew the whole deal. Played hide and seek when they were growing up there. And they knew everything about what their dad wore, all the robes, where everything went. They knew everything about the tabernacle, except they knew nothing about the God that was to be worshiped in the tabernacle. They did not take God seriously. Somewhere in there, there's a gap. And there's a failure to teach these young men about the Lord. And it seems to come because Eli, busy. Eli's busy with other things. Eli's busy with important things. He's doing other things. He's busy governing and leading and directing all the people of Israel, doing all those things. But somehow in all that, he did not teach his children to worship God. Men, this is coming straight to you and straight at you. Job number one is not what you're going to do tomorrow to get the paycheck. Job number one is not what you do here as a deacon, as a servant. It's what you do in front of this audience. That's not job one. Job number one is to make sure that your children know about God, know how to worship God, and know how to serve God. It's right at you. This is about you, men. Notice Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Hold your place in Samuel. Men are specifically singled out. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. I'm hitting it hard. I'm hitting it hard every day about this because you know what? A lot of times when children don't develop spiritually, you know what I hear? Well, I guess their mom just didn't teach them. Yeah, we're going to hear that. And I'm going to tell you something. That's a fail. That's a fail. There's failure in that. I wonder if Eli thought that about his wife. Well, the mom just didn't get it to him. Huh? That's a fail. And that fail led to many more fails. Look back again, 1 Samuel chapter 3. One of the issues there is, I think, too, that parents, that their kids grow up and know nothing spiritually is that I think there's a failing there because I think a lot of parents, they struggle to see what really is going on. 1 Samuel chapter 2, beginning in verse 22, maybe you're thinking, you know what, maybe Eli didn't know. Hey, man, them boys were ornery. But you know what, maybe Eli didn't know. Look, Eli, verse 22, was very old. And he kept hearing all his sons were doing to all Israel. He knew. Eli knew about what his boys were doing. All right? Now, their text layers more on that. How they lay with women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Now, what do you got? Well, you got a failure to worship. You got these boys that are interrupting the worship of others. And also now you got sexual immorality in the place of worship. So he says in verse 23, notice what he says. He said to them, why do you do such things? The evil things that I hear from all these people. No, my sons, verse 24, for the report is not good, which I hear the Lord's people, he says, circulate. So this is going on. And I want to tell you something. I don't think Eli takes very serious what's going on. Now, he does address it. Naughty, naughty, spanky, spanky, a little bit on the back of the hands, because I look at the gravity of what's going on here, and I look at Eli's actions and his conduct, and it doesn't even come close or match what they're doing. So, we read chapter 3, verse 13. Yeah, he knew. He knew that his sons blasphemed God, but what's that passage say? He did not restrain them. How's that possible? How's that possible that he knew all this was going on and he did not restrain them? I'll tell you how it's possible. Because we love our kids. We love our kids. That's why it's possible. And when it comes to our kids, I'm going to tell you what, they're the best of the best. Yes, they are. And so when evidence comes to light that our child is doing something that it ought not to do, you know what we do? We explain, halt the phase. It's just growing pains, you know. Oh, boys will be, oh, he's really tired too. You caught him at a bad time. We don't want to admit anything about our kids, do we? No, sirree. You see all this time, you know, I think about on the news every time, you know, here's a guy that's been arrested for some heinous crime, and I'm telling you what, you can just tell the guy is evil. And what they do, they go get mama and they stick a microphone in her face. Hey, tell us about your boy. He's a good boy. Oh, he's never done anything bad. He's a good... Newsflash, Mom, he's a murderer. He killed 5 people. Didn't see it. Didn't see it. Eli didn't want to believe that. He didn't want to hear the things that he was being told. His sons were violating God's law. His sons were wicked. Somehow, you know what he thought? You know what a lot of us do? Oh, take care of itself. It'll all come out in the wash. Eli didn't address it. Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs chapter 19. Notice what he says. The wise man, verse 18. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Discipline your child. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. One translation says, discipline your children while they are young enough to learn. But you know what you got to do before you can do that? You've got to see that there's a problem. Several years ago, a preacher was telling me about an incident. He's not at this congregation anymore, but he was talking about this young man, this boy. He was a terror. He was truly unruly and undisciplined. He interfered with what they were trying to do in Bible class. He interfered with what they were trying to do in worship service. And he was at his house not his house, not this kid's house, but there were several families that gathered for dinner, and there were probably 5 or 6 different families there. And this kid was there, and the kid actually vandalized the house, tried to set it on fire, going around kicking the adults. And everybody in the room was, of course, looking around and seen it and noticed it, except Dad. Dad was blissfully unaware of the kid. This preacher followed up with that family and that kid. He's in jail. He's in prison for life. No more, isn't that cute? No more ignoring it. All right? Dad didn't see it. Dad couldn't see it. No. Dad would not see it. I have huge concerns about that. Huge concerns. We are unable to see that in our children. And I'll tell you what else. We're unable to listen to someone who says, do you know about your child? You know what's going on? And I'll tell you what, when we get to the place where, you know, we don't, I'll tell you what that does. That accelerates spiritual failure. That accelerates your child being away from the Lord. When people tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you know this about your kid? No. That's defensive. We jump right on the defense mode, and that surely seems to be the case of Eli's life here, because there's a time, again, I said, and that's in verse 1 of chapter 3, where the word of the Lord was very rare, but that didn't mean it was non-existent. In chapter 2, after this scene where Eli says to his son, what's up? What's up? Why do you behave this way is basically what he says. And there's really no submissive rebuke or substantiated rebuke. There's really nothing much going on. And so nothing constructive happened. But then notice verse 27 of chapter 2. Let's go back there. Notice what he says. Verse 27. He says, then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, thus says the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests and to go up to my altar to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? And when you look at that, so the word of God came to Eli and really explained something's terribly amiss. So look at verse 29. Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I've commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people itself? Wow. Now the prophet goes on from there, and really there's quite a long revelation there, and he boldly rebukes Eli, and you know, the judgment of God is going to fall on his house because of the wickedness that his sons are involved in. In fact, that's why God came in 1 Samuel chapter 3, because in chapter 2, Eli didn't really do much. Eli didn't really, so chapter 3, listen, God's not kidding about this. God's serious about this. But I want you to look how the story dismally really just ends. Verse 13, so I declared to him, I'm going to punish his house. There's all kinds of discussion. Verse 14, so the little boy Samuel, he lay there until morning. All right. Samuel didn't want to say what he needed to say to Eli. This is bad stuff. I can't even speak what God told me to reveal to you. I don't want to tell you. But Eli says to him, listen, tell me. I want you to tell me, verse 17. So Samuel told him, verse 18, everything, and hid nothing from him. Then, verse 18, Eli said, well, it's the Lord. Yeah, it's the Lord. Yeah, it's the Lord. Let him do what seems good to me. Yeah. You know how it goes. I guess it's just the Lord. Why doesn't verse 18 say, this is where it ends, boys. This is where we're going to stop now. Yeah, you've been involved in some things. I'm telling you what, the hammer's down. You've been unfaithful in your service to God. You've been unfaithful in worship. You've been unfaithful in every single thing. It ends now. I'm taking you to the elders right now for judgment. No more sin. We're done with this. The judgment of God might fall on me, but I'll tell you what, he's going to find me digging and rooting to do the right thing by God and not by you. No. That's not what he says. That's not what he does. That's the Lord. Let him do what seems to be right. There's a passive acceptance there. That's what's going on there. Cannot be changed. Can I gently say to you, Mom and Dad, that sometimes we need to realize that our kids are wrong? Huh? When a teacher or a counselor in school says, you know what, your child's not doing what he needs to be doing, that doesn't immediately mean that the teacher is incompetent and plays favorites. When something like, that just doesn't mean that they're completely out to get your kid. More to home, when a Bible class teacher says, hey, I want to talk to you about, your kid in Bible class, that doesn't mean that the teacher doesn't understand your kid. Or an elder says, hey, I need to discuss some things with you about how your kid's behaving in services. That doesn't mean that you react and say, oh, everybody goes crazy, and why are you singling me out? That's not what that means. We get defensive, and instead of responding to the warnings of others, it just accelerates our spiritual weakness, and our family deteriorates. I think it's a huge concern. Titus chapter 2. It's not how people of God are to operate. Titus chapter 2. What's envisioned here is a community of believers working together. Verse 1, he talks about the teaching according to sound doctrine. Look at verse 2. Older men are to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in the faith, and love, and he says in perseverance. Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, not enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love the children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. You see the relationship there? See the relationship there in the church? Older women, younger women, older women speaking to younger women, listening. Do you see that? Do you see all that going on? Verse 6, younger men need to be self-controlled. This all portrays a church that's working together, being together, communicating together, things that need to be done. I'm going to tell you something. There were times when that worked. There were times when that operated, but all of this shows that folks were trying to work together, but it did used to work in past generations. I'm telling you, if somebody at school called my parents, or a neighbor called my parents, anybody called my parents, swift judgment and punishment. I can promise you that. Discipline works. Not doing that. We're not doing that. It was taken seriously. Discipline was taken seriously. And when a problem came up with your kid, it was sat down, you talked about it, you counseled about it. And you did not look at the person and say, what's wrong with you? I dare you say that about my kid. That wasn't the reaction. We didn't do that kind of thing. Instead, there was investigation. Hey, what's going on in Bible class? What's going on in church? What's going on in school? What's going on over at Johnny's? All of those things. But what was it? We willingly turn a blind eye now. Blind eye. You know, we want to think what's best about our kids. We want to think the best of our kids. But I'll tell you what, folks, we need to be open to rebuke. Parents, you need to be open to admonition. Proverbs again, chapter 15. A little bit more Solomon there. Chapter 12, verse 15. He says this, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. Can I candidly say to you that one of the hardest conversations that you'll ever do, one of the hardest conversations you'll ever have is about somebody coming to you, that person, and talking about something wrong with your child. Something that your child is involved in that they shouldn't be involved in. Those are difficult conversations. Those are hand-wringing conversations. If somebody cares enough about your kid to come to you and say something about your kid, I need to talk to you. I need you to listen to something that's going on. I'm telling you, there's a warning for you. There's a warning for you that you need to think about. Don't be a fool. Don't be a fool like Eli was a fool. Don't refuse to act on that. Don't turn a deaf ear. Hear the explicit warnings that come from God. Which brings me to this fourth observation. You know what? The truth of the matter is, the failure on Eli's part was because he cared more for his relationship with his kids than he did with God. And that's a hard thing to say, but I want you to look again at chapter 2, verse 29. Notice again, he says, why do you honor your sons more than me? Why do you honor your sons more than me? Do you think Eli thought that? If you would ask Eli that, do you think he'd have thought that? What do you mean I honor my sons ahead of you? Well, look at everything I do. I'm a high priest. I'm a judge. I do this and this for God. I serve God. All of those things. But the prophet was wrong, wasn't he? And God wasn't lying here. Eli put his relationship with his kids above God. You know what one of the problems was with Eli? He wanted to be his kids' friend. He wanted to be their pal. He wanted to be their buddy. Verse 29 says, why do you honor your sons above me by fattening who? Yourselves. One of the sins of Eli's sons, you read there in chapter 2, They took part in an offering that they had no right to do. But there's an inference here in scholars' belief that Eli took part of it with him. He fattened himself. Eli did the same thing. Now let me ask you, what do you think Eli's kids thought about him? Oh, he's the coolest dad. My dad's the coolest. He never says anything like him other dads. He never puts me down like him other dads. Me and my dad, we do everything together. It's the greatest. He's the best friend I got. In a survey, there goes one of the Dorton surveys again, 1,000 parents, 43% said that they want to be their child's best friend. 40% said if they could, they would buy every single thing their child wanted. Sounds a lot like Eli, doesn't it? Let me show you a text in Luke chapter 14. It's amazing, and I want you to look at this text through the lens of a parent. What it means as a parent. It's one of these verses, I think that by the time we get done explaining it, we've explained this passage away, I think, sometimes. Look at verse 26. If anyone, the Lord says, comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife, and children, and brothers, and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, every time we hit that verse, what do we start talking about? Now, that hate there, that doesn't mean hate, does it? No, that doesn't mean hate. That means love less, doesn't it? Yeah, that's what that means, and I get that, and I understand that. But before you pitch that verse in the trash can, and like it doesn't mean anything, Jesus is saying something there. What does he mean there? Jesus is saying, if you're going to be my disciple, you're going to be a follower of me, it will mean directly, from time to time in your life, what that means is you're going to have to reject the people that mean the most to you. If you're going to serve me, this is what you're going to have to do. That you're going to do whatever Jesus demands that we do. Because you're going to follow Christ. There's going to be times in your life when we're obedient to him. It's going to make you unpopular with your family. It's going to make you unpopular with your children. It's going to make you misunderstood with your children, your family. Some people say, I'll tell you what, that's not the way it is, though. Oh, it ought to be that way. Really? What about when Christians sat down with Gentiles to eat and those Jews went, I can't believe you eat with those dogs. What about when it was time to go to idol worship and the wife that's still an idol worshiper says, oh, come on, let's go. You can skip out today. Let's go somewhere else. Let's do something. Let's go to this guy. Jesus, just another idol. What about those times? Serving Jesus Christ changes your life. And it puts demands on your life as a father, as a mother. And we need to be ready to do that. We need to be ready to hear that. Always. Even when it's not popular. And even when they don't understand it. We love Jesus. And really, folks, I'm telling you what, we love Jesus in his way. More than we love our kids. We better start showing it. You better believe it. To do otherwise, really, is just ignore Ephesians 6 and really to ignore everything we just looked over in the Proverbs and all that. When we do that, when we decide that our kids are more important than God, I'll tell you what, God, you're important. Oh, you're important. You're up there, but they're my kids. They're my kids. Please get your songbooks out. 1 Samuel 3 is a great chapter. Talks about a little boy named Samuel who's so faithful. But the backdrop of that is a man named Eli. He should have stood up. He didn't. He should have had conviction. He didn't. Should have been corrected. He wasn't. Eli did nothing. He did nothing. And as a result of that, his family miserably and utterly failed. Failed spiritually. Jesus said, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved. That's the blessed gospel today, as well as 2,000 years ago. If you've never done that, you're not a Christian. You're in an unsaved state. We'd love to see you obey the gospel today. If you need the prayers of this congregation, I'd love to pray with you. Something between you and the cross, let's take that away this day. Please come. As together we stand and sing.